People said the beast beneath Blackthorn Castle had forgotten how to speak, but no one ever wondered whether it had simply forgotten what kindness sounded like. The first scream came just after midnight. It rolled through the ancient stones of Blackthorn Castle like a living storm, shaking dust from the vaulted ceilings and sending torch flames trembling along the endless corridors. Servants froze where they stood. A silver tray crashed onto polished marble somewhere beyond the eastern wing. Stable horses shrieked and kicked against their stalls. Even the ravens nesting upon the highest towers burst into the moonlit sky as though fleeing an invisible predator. Then came the second howl. Longer. Deeper. It was not the triumphant cry of a hunter. It sounded painfully close to grief. The guards stationed outside the western stairwell instinctively tightened their grips on their spears before exchanging uneasy glances. None of them dared move toward the iron gate hidden beneath the castle chapel. They had all heard the stories. Some claimed the creature chained below had once devoured an entire company of royal soldiers before the king's knights finally subdued it. Others whispered that silver blades shattered against its hide while its crimson eyes glowed brighter than molten steel. No one agreed on what the monster truly was. Everyone agreed it should never be approached. Another violent crash echoed from underground. Iron scraped against stone. Chains groaned beneath impossible strength. One young guard swallowed hard. Still alive. His captain answered without taking his eyes off the gate. Unfortunately. Silence followed for only a heartbeat before another roar erupted from below, so powerful that loose pebbles danced across the floor. It was the sound of something enormous throwing itself against enchanted restraints again and again, refusing either freedom or surrender. The captain quietly crossed himself. May the moon goddess have mercy. No one replied. Mercy had abandoned this place years ago. Far beneath the castle, where sunlight had never reached and the scent of damp stone lingered in every breath, the dungeon stretched like the roots of some forgotten nightmare. Water dripped steadily from cracked ceilings into shallow pools that reflected the flickering glow of dying torches. Moss crept between ancient bricks blackened by age, while thick silver runes carved into the walls shimmered faintly whenever another howl shook the earth. Every corridor led toward a single chamber. Every chain pointed toward a single prisoner. No servant accepted work below unless ordered by the royal council. Even executioners refused to linger. They brought food. They pushed it through a narrow iron hatch. Then they ran. Sometimes untouched meals remained there for days. Sometimes the plates returned twisted beyond recognition. No one asked questions. Curiosity had buried too many men already. Tonight felt different. The air itself seemed heavier, carrying a strange ache beneath the cold. Instead of the familiar rage that usually echoed through the tunnels, there was something uneven hidden between the roars. Pain. Raw. Endless. As though whatever lived behind those reinforced doors was no longer fighting to escape. It was fighting to survive. High above the dungeon, the castle remained awake despite the late hour. Candles still burned inside the council chamber where frightened nobles argued in strained voices. The creature grows stronger. It has nearly broken the southern restraints. We cannot risk another massacre. End it before the next full moon. The oldest advisor stared silently into the fire. You speak as though killing it were possible. No one answered him. Because everyone remembered. Every execution attempt had failed. Every royal mage sent below either disappeared or returned broken in mind, unable to speak of what they had witnessed. One had done nothing except cry until the day he died. Outside, rain finally began to fall. Soft at first, then steady. The droplets tapped gently against stained glass windows overlooking the chapel, washing moonlight into pale ribbons of silver that stretched across worn stone floors. Beyond those windows stood a small figure wrapped in a simple gray cloak. She paused beneath the archway, clutching an old wicker basket against her chest. Unlike the armored guards surrounding her, she carried no sword, no shield, no silver weapon. Only a small loaf of fresh bread, a clay flask of warm milk, and a tiny oil lantern whose fragile flame painted her delicate face with soft golden light. Elena Hart drew a slow breath. At 19, she possessed neither the strength of an alpha nor the confidence of a warrior. Her white skin seemed almost luminous beneath the dim chapel candles, framed by chestnut hair loosely braided over one shoulder. Gentle blue eyes, clear despite obvious exhaustion, rested upon the enormous iron gate hidden behind rows of weathered prayer benches. Another howl exploded beneath her feet. The basket trembled in her hands. So did her heartbeat. One elderly nun standing nearby hurried forward, catching Elena's wrist before she could take another step. "Child." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You've heard it." Elena nodded. "You know what waits below." Another nod. The old woman's fingers tightened. "Then don't go." For a moment, Elena lowered her eyes toward the worn stones beneath her boots. Somewhere below them, another violent crash thundered through the castle, followed not by roaring, but by something heartbreakingly quiet. A sound almost too faint to notice. It resembled a wounded breath. Or perhaps, someone trying not to cry. Elena slowly lifted her gaze toward the black iron gate. Fear lingered inside her. Anyone could see it. Her hands still trembled around the lantern. Yet instead of stepping backward, she took one careful step forward, then another, toward the darkness where everyone believed only a monster remained. Elena Hart had learned long ago that the gentlest gifts were often mistaken for the weakest. She was 5 years old when her mother first placed a rough wool blanket over her shoulders and carried her outside beneath a sky washed in silver moonlight. The forest beyond their tiny cottage had been alive with distant howls, each one rising and falling through the towering pines like a language the night itself understood. Instead of pulling her daughter closer in fear, her mother had smiled. "Listen carefully." Little Elena tilted her head. "They sound angry," she whispered. "No." Her mother brushed a loose strand of chestnut hair behind Elena's ear. "They sound lonely." That single sentence stayed with Elena long after the woman who spoke it was gone. Her mother had died only 2 winters later, leaving behind little more than a faded blue shawl, a wooden music box that no longer played properly, and a lullaby so simple that most people forgot it after hearing it once. Elena never forgot. She sang it while sweeping monastery floors. She sang it while tending injured birds with broken wings. She sang it to frightened children hiding beneath tables during thunderstorms. Sometimes she even caught herself humming it while kneading bread before sunrise. It was never meant to impress anyone. It was simply the last piece of her mother she refused to lose. The Sisters of St. Aloan had taken her in after the fever swept through her village. Their monastery rested against the cliffs overlooking Blackthorn Castle, where bells marked every hour and prayer echoed through ancient stone halls from dawn until nightfall. Life there was quiet, predictable, safe, at least for everyone except Elena. The older sisters loved her gentle heart but worried constantly about her future. An Omega without family, without wealth, without a powerful pack to protect her. Kindness alone could not survive the world beyond monastery walls. "You're too trusting," Sister Miriam often warned while folding fresh linens. "One day someone cruel will mistake your kindness for weakness." Elena usually smiled before answering. "Then I hope they meet kindness before they meet me." Miriam always sighed. "You sound exactly like your mother." Elena considered that the greatest compliment she had ever received. Her days followed the same peaceful rhythm. Morning prayers, preparing herbal medicines, collecting rainwater, tending the vegetable gardens, helping elderly villagers whose hands had grown too stiff to work. She never asked whether they belonged to Alpha families or Omega families. Pain looked the same on everyone. So did hunger. So did grief. The villagers often whispered that Elena possessed strange hands. Not magical. Not blessed. Simply calming. A crying infant would stop sobbing when she held them. A frightened horse would lower its head after hearing her voice. Even wounded hunting dogs stopped trembling while she cleaned their injuries. People thanked the moon goddess. Elena quietly thanked her mother. Yet beyond the monastery walls, another story spread through the kingdom. One filled with fear. Every traveler passing Blackthorn Castle carried a different version. Some insisted the monster beneath the castle had once been a great wolf cursed by ancient witches. Others believed it had fallen from the Shadowlands beyond the northern mountains. A few swore it was no beast at all, only a demon wearing wolf skin. Each story grew darker with every telling. Children challenged one another to approach the castle gates before sunset. None dared remain after darkness fell, because when midnight arrived, the screaming began. Elena had heard those cries countless times while kneeling in evening prayer. The younger novices covered their ears. Some cried. Others begged the sisters to light more candles. Only Elena listened. Really listened. Between the violent roars, there were pauses. Short, uneven, almost hesitant, as though something beneath all that fury struggled desperately to breathe. The thought unsettled her. Monsters weren't supposed to sound exhausted. One rainy afternoon, she carried fresh herbs toward the monastery infirmary when she overheard two royal servants speaking outside the front gate. 3 more guards resigned. I don't blame them. They say the beast nearly tore the enchanted chains apart. The council will execute it soon. Their footsteps faded into the rain. Elena remained standing beneath the stone archway, clutching her basket tighter. Executed. The words echoed inside her mind long after the men disappeared. That evening, while preparing bread in the monastery kitchen, she found herself staring into the fire instead of kneading dough. What troubles you? Mother Agnes spoke softly without looking up from the herbs she was sorting. Elena hesitated. Do you believe? She stopped. Mother Agnes smiled faintly. Finish the question. Elena lowered her eyes. Do you believe every monster chooses to become one? Silence settled between them. Only the crackling fire answered at first. Finally, Mother Agnes set down the bundle of lavender in her hands. When hatred is fed every day, she looked toward the castle visible through the rain-covered window. Even the gentlest soul may eventually forget its own name. Elena followed her gaze. Blackthorn Castle stood against the storm like a mountain carved from darkness. Lightning flashed behind its towers. For one brief moment, she imagined someone sitting alone somewhere beneath those endless stones. Not sleeping, not resting, only waiting for another endless night. Then, faintly, almost carried by the wind itself, another howl drifted across the valley. The novices flinched. Several crossed themselves. Elena did neither. Instead, she closed her eyes. And, for the first time, she silently wondered what kind of pain could make a living creature scream every single night without ever losing its voice. The door to the forbidden stairway had not been opened by gentle hands in many years. Its iron hinges groaned like an old man waking from an endless nightmare as 2 royal guards struggled to pull it inward. Rust flaked onto the stone floor. A breath of icy air escaped from the darkness below, carrying with it the smell of wet earth, extinguished torches, old blood, and something metallic that lingered on the tongue. Silver. Enough silver had been forged into the dungeon beneath Blackthorn Castle to wage an entire war. Elena instinctively tightened her grip around the wicker basket resting against her chest. The warm loaf of bread inside still smelled of rosemary. The small clay flask held fresh goat's milk that had only moments ago been heated over the monastery fire. The simple scents felt strangely alive against the cold breath rising from beneath the castle. Last chance. Captain Rowan's voice echoed through the empty chapel. You may still refuse. Elena looked at him. The captain had served the royal family for nearly 30 years. Thick scars crossed his weathered face, gifts from battles fought long before Elena had been born. Yet even this hardened alpha refused to step within the stairwell itself. You've never seen what's down there, he continued quietly. I haven't. Good. His jaw tightened. Keep it that way. The younger guard beside him laughed nervously. It isn't a prisoner. He swallowed. It's a nightmare wearing fur. Neither man noticed Elena lowering her eyes. Nightmares. People always gave frightening things simple names. It made fearing them easier. Mother Agnes had accompanied her as far as the chapel, but no farther. The elderly abbess rested a gentle hand upon Elena's shoulder. I cannot tell you to go. Her fingers trembled. And I cannot tell you to stay. She reached into her robe and placed something small into Elena's palm. A faded wooden music box. Its paint had nearly disappeared with age. The tiny brass key barely turned anymore. It belonged to your mother. Elena's blue eyes widened. You kept it. I was waiting for the day you needed courage more than comfort. A soft smile touched the old woman's face. Perhaps today is that day. Elena carefully tucked the little music box inside her cloak. Its familiar weight settled close to her heart. She took one slow breath. Then another. Without another word, she stepped onto the first stone stair. The heavy iron door closed behind her. The sound rolled through the stairwell like distant thunder. Darkness swallowed everything. Only the tiny lantern in Elena's hand painted a trembling circle of amber light across the ancient walls. Water dripped steadily somewhere below. One drop. Another. Another. Each sound echoed for far longer than seemed possible. The staircase spiraled endlessly downward through solid rock. Silver runes had been carved into every wall, floor, and ceiling. Hundreds of strange symbols shimmered faintly beneath the lantern's glow, pulsing almost like slow heartbeats. The air grew colder with every step. Elena's breath became visible. She pulled her gray cloak tighter around her shoulders, though the chill seemed to come from something deeper than winter itself. Then, she noticed the claw marks. Deep grooves stretched across the stone walls. Not scratches. Wounds. Each one nearly the length of her arm. Some had cut directly through enchanted silver inscriptions as though they were no stronger than soft clay. She paused. The lantern shook slightly in her hand. Whatever creature had left those marks possessed strength beyond imagination. Far below, something heavy shifted. Metal scraped against stone. The sound vibrated through the staircase beneath her boots. Not loud, not violent. Slow, almost exhausted. Elena continued downward. The silence became stranger the deeper she descended. No rats. No insects. No birds nesting within cracks. Even the water seemed hesitant to fall. It felt as though life itself refused to enter these depths. Finally, the staircase opened into a long corridor lined with towering pillars carved from black granite. Every 10 paces stood another iron gate. Every gate had been bent outward. Some were twisted beyond recognition. Others bore enormous dents where something had thrown itself against them countless times. Silver chains as thick as tree trunks lay scattered across the floor. Several had snapped cleanly in half. Elena stopped again. No ordinary beast could have broken them. Her heartbeat quickened. Yet strangely, she still felt no desire to run. Only curiosity. At the corridor's end stood one final door. Unlike every other gate, this one remained intact. It rose nearly 20 feet high, forged from black steel reinforced with glowing silver bars crossing one another like the roots of an ancient tree. Hundreds of wax candles burned outside the entrance. All had melted completely. No one had returned to replace them. Someone had abandoned this place long ago. Elena stepped closer. Then she heard it. Not a roar. Not this time. A slow, uneven breathing drifted through the tiny opening at the bottom of the massive door. Each breath sounded painful, labored, as though every inhale fought against invisible knives buried deep inside its chest. Her fingers tightened around the basket. Another breath followed. Then, a low growl. Not threatening. Warning. Weak. Almost instinctive. The hairs along Elena's arms rose. She should have been terrified. Instead, her heart ached. Because beneath the terrifying voice, she heard something no one else seemed willing to hear. Exhaustion. Loneliness. Suffering. She knelt carefully before the iron hatch built into the bottom of the door. Tiny claw marks surrounded its edges where countless meals had once been shoved through. Most of the wooden bowls still lay shattered nearby. No one had bothered cleaning them. Elena slowly set the basket onto the cold floor. She reached toward the latch. Her fingertips barely brushed the frozen iron, when two brilliant eyes suddenly opened inside the darkness beyond. They were enormous. Luminous. The color of frozen winter skies. Not crimson. Not monstrous. Blue. Ancient. Watching her without blinking. For one endless heartbeat. Neither of them moved. The dungeon held its breath. And somewhere deep inside the endless darkness, The beast stared at the first person who had ever remained instead of running away. The wolf moved first. Not with violence. Not with the explosive fury every story had promised. It simply rose from the darkness. The sound came before the shape, massive paws pressing slowly against the stone floor, claws clicking softly as they emerged beyond the reach of the lantern's trembling light. Every movement carried impossible weight. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The silver chains fastened deep into the walls tightened with a low metallic groan. Elena remained perfectly still. Her pulse hammered so loudly she wondered if the creature could hear it. Then the lantern revealed him. His shoulders stood nearly as high as her chest even while walking on four legs. Thick silver-black fur covered a body carved with countless old scars. Heavy iron collars circled his neck, each one engraved with glowing runes that pulsed faintly beneath his coat. Several broken chains dragged behind him across the stone floor, leaving fresh grooves in the ancient rock. His blue eyes never left hers. Ancient. Alert. Exhausted. He stopped only a few feet beyond the iron hatch. Close enough for Elena to hear his breathing. Close enough to see dried blood staining the fur around one foreleg where silver had burned through flesh. The wound looked recent. Painfully recent. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Only the tiny lantern flame danced between them. The wolf lowered his head slightly. His nostrils flared. He was smelling the fresh bread. The warm milk. The rain lingering in Elena's cloak. The lavender soap from the monastery. Something shifted behind those luminous eyes. Confusion. As though those scents belonged to a forgotten memory. Elena slowly slid the wooden bowl of bread through the hatch. The scrape of wood against stone echoed through the chamber. The wolf did not touch it. Instead, he watched her. Every instinct whispered that she should retreat. The stories flooded back into her mind. He devoured soldiers. He crushed enchanted gates. He slaughtered anyone foolish enough to approach. Yet none of those stories matched what stood before her now. This creature was not preparing to attack. He was waiting. Waiting for something she could not understand. She reached for the clay flask and carefully poured warm milk into a shallow bowl. Steam curled gently into the freezing air. Only then did the wolf take one cautious step forward. Another. His enormous paw stopped beside the bowl. He lowered his muzzle. Then suddenly froze. A violent tremor rippled through his body. His muscles tightened. His ears flattened. A low growl escaped his throat. Not directed at Elena. Directed inward. As though he were fighting something hidden beneath his own skin. Without warning, he stumbled backward. The silver collars around his neck burst into pale light. Runes ignited one after another across the dungeon walls. The wolf threw back his head and released a roar so agonizing that Elena instinctively covered her ears. It wasn't anger. It was suffering. Raw. Uncontrolled. The roar echoed through every corridor beneath the castle before collapsing into a broken, ragged breath. The creature sank heavily onto the cold floor. His sides rose and fell unevenly. His eyes squeezed shut. Elena stared in silence. She had seen fever. She had treated broken bones. She had comforted dying villagers whose final breaths came in painful gasps. Pain had many voices. This one sounded frighteningly familiar. It was the voice of someone enduring more than anyone should. Her fear quietly loosened its grip. Without thinking, she placed one hand over the little wooden music box hidden beneath her cloak. Its smooth edges reminded her of another winter. Another voice. Her mother's. When fear enters your heart, she used to whisper, sing before it learns your name. Elena swallowed. Her lips parted. At first, no sound came. The wolf remained curled against the stone, breathing hard. His ears twitched slightly. Then Elena began. Softly. So softly that even the dripping water nearly drowned out the first notes. It was not a grand melody. Not the song of royal musicians. Only an old village lullaby carried from one mother to one daughter. A melody woven from quiet evenings, warm fireplaces, and gentle hands brushing tangled hair from sleepy eyes. Her voice floated carefully through the frozen chamber. Light. Tender. Almost fragile. The wolf's breathing faltered. His ears lifted. The growling stopped. Elena continued singing. The lantern flame flickered gently as her voice wrapped itself around the silence that had haunted the dungeon for years. One verse. Then another. She did not step closer. She did not ask anything of him. She simply sang. The wolf slowly raised his head. His brilliant blue eyes found hers again. This time, there was no warning inside them. No rage. Only bewilderment. As though he had not heard another living soul sing without fear in a lifetime. His enormous body gradually relaxed. The muscles beneath his scarred shoulders loosened. The trembling eased. Even the glowing runes carved into the walls began to dim. Far above, the guards waiting outside the chapel exchanged startled glances. Do you hear that? Captain Rowan frowned. The screaming. The younger guard looked toward the floor. It stopped. Neither man understood why. Back in the dungeon, Elena reached the final lines of the lullaby. Her voice became almost a whisper. The last note lingered gently in the cold air before disappearing into silence. For several long heartbeats, nothing happened. Then something impossible occurred. The monstrous wolf lowered his great head until his chin rested upon the freezing stone floor. His eyes slowly closed. Not in defeat. Not in submission. In peace. The endless tension that had gripped his body dissolved like snow beneath morning sunlight. For the first time in countless years, the beast of Blackthorn Castle fell asleep. And, without realizing it, the young Omega had just accomplished what chains, silver, soldiers, and royal magic never could. The next night, the castle waited for the scream. It had become as dependable as the moon. Kitchen servants hurried to finish their work before midnight. Guards silently changed posts outside the western chapel. Candles were lit earlier than usual, and every door leading toward the lower corridors was locked before darkness fully settled over Blackthorn Castle. No one spoke of hope. Hope had disappeared from the castle years ago. Everyone simply prepared themselves for another night of roaring walls and trembling stone. Midnight came. The chapel bell rang once, then twice. The entire castle held its breath. Nothing. One young servant looked nervously toward the ceiling. Did we miss the hour? No. The older cook wiped flour from his hands. It always starts now. They waited. Another minute passed. Still. Nothing. No hull. No crashing chains. No desperate roar that made every soul inside the castle flinch. Only silence. A silence so unfamiliar that it frightened them more than the screaming ever had. Far below, hidden beneath hundreds of feet of ancient stone, Elena carefully opened the iron hatch once again. The little lantern illuminated the familiar chamber. The wooden bowl from the previous evening sat empty. Not shattered. Not overturned. Empty. Every crumb of bread had disappeared. The clay bowl had been licked perfectly clean. A faint smile touched Elena's lips. So, she whispered almost to herself. You were hungry after all. She slid another loaf through the opening. Fresh bread. Warm milk. A small bundle of herbs wrapped carefully inside clean linen. The wolf did not appear immediately. She waited quietly. The lantern crackled softly beside her. Then, from somewhere deep inside the darkness, she heard slow footsteps. Unlike the previous night, they carried no urgency. No rage. Only caution. The enormous figure emerged little by little into the lantern's glow. His brilliant blue eyes settled upon Elena almost instantly. She noticed something different. His ears no longer lay flat against his head. His breathing had become steadier. Even the terrible tension beneath his broad shoulders seemed lighter, if only by a little. The wolf stopped before the food. He glanced down at the bowl. Then, he looked back at Elena, as though making certain she was truly there. Only after finding her exactly where she had been the night before did he lower his head and begin eating. Slowly. Without growling. Without fear. Elena leaned against the cold stone wall outside the cell. She did not interrupt him. She simply watched. The silence between them no longer felt frightening. It felt peaceful. When he finished, she reached into her basket once more. I brought something else. Of course, she knew he could not answer. Still, speaking aloud somehow made the dungeon feel less lonely. She removed a clean strip of linen soaked with herbal ointment. The wound around his foreleg looked worse in the lantern light. The flesh surrounding the silver burns remained swollen and angry. You should let someone treat this. The wolf froze. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in hostility. In uncertainty. Elena slowly placed the bandage near the hatch instead of attempting to touch him. I won't force you. She folded her hands in her lap. But silver wounds become infected. For several moments, neither moved. Then the wolf lowered his head toward the cloth. He sniffed it carefully. Lavender. Comfrey. Honey. The familiar scent of monastery medicine. His ears twitched. Carefully. Almost awkwardly. He nudged the bandage toward himself with his nose. Elena's smile grew just a little wider. That's a start. High above them, whispers spread through the castle. Captain Rowan stood outside the chapel with 3 other guards. I don't understand. The creature hasn't attacked the walls. No chains have broken. No screaming. One of the younger soldiers crossed himself. Maybe it's dying. No. The captain stared thoughtfully at the sealed stairway. It sounds. He searched for the proper word. Calm. Inside the royal council chamber, frightened nobles argued over maps and reports. The silence is unnatural. It must be planning something. We should double the guards. The royal chancellor shook his head. No beast simply changes overnight. At the far end of the table sat a man who had spoken very little throughout the meeting. Royal Court Mage Alaric. His silver hair fell neatly over dark robes embroidered with ancient runes. Unlike the others, his expression revealed neither fear nor relief. Only curiosity. He slowly closed the report in front of him. When did the silence begin? A servant answered. The same evening the monastery girl delivered food. Alaric's fingers paused. The Omega? Yes, Your Excellency. Another long silence followed. Then the mage rose from his chair. I wish to observe tomorrow's visit. The council exchanged confused glances. You believe the girl is using magic? Alaric looked toward the rain-covered window. If it were magic, he murmured, the dungeon would have resisted. His pale eyes narrowed thoughtfully. But according to every report, he tapped one finger lightly against the parchment. The runes weakened instead. No one understood what he meant. Not even Alaric himself. Back below the castle, Elena sat humming softly while replacing the empty bowls inside her basket. The wolf had not returned to the shadows. Instead, he remained lying several feet from the iron door. His enormous head rested upon crossed paws. His eyes stayed open, watching her. Not with suspicion. Not with hunger. With quiet attention. As though every note she hummed filled a silence he had forgotten could exist. When Elena finally stood to leave, she lifted the lantern and smiled gently through the iron bars. I'll come back tomorrow. The wolf did not move. She turned toward the endless staircase. Her footsteps gradually faded into the corridor. Only after the last flicker of her lantern disappeared beyond the bend did the great wolf slowly rise. He walked to the empty doorway where she had knelt only moments before. Lowering his massive head, he inhaled deeply. The cold stones still carried the faint scent of lavender. Fresh bread. And the young Omega who had somehow become the only reason the darkness no longer felt endless. Rumors traveled through Blackthorn Castle faster than the wind. By the 4th morning, every servant, soldier, and noble had noticed the impossible. The walls no longer shook at midnight. No silver chains rattled through the darkness. No terrified horses battered their stable doors. For the first time in years, children living inside the castle slept through the night without waking in tears. Yet peace did not comfort the kingdom. It unsettled it. Fear had become so familiar that silence felt like the beginning of something worse. In the great council chamber, rain tapped softly against tall stained glass windows while the kingdom's highest nobles argued around an ancient oak table. Lord Cedric Hawthorne struck the table with the end of his cane. This has gone on long enough. His sharp gray eyes swept across the room. The beast grows quieter. Another lord nodded grimly. Predators become silent before they strike. A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber. Only Court Mage Alaric remained motionless. His fingers rested lightly upon several reports gathered over the past week. Delivery logs, guard rotations, observations from the Western Chapel. Every page repeated the same impossible detail. The monastery girl entered. The beast became calm. She left. The beast waited. Alaric finally broke the silence. Has the creature harmed anyone since the Omega began visiting? No. Attempted escape? No. Broken restraints? Again. No. The old mage closed the reports. Then perhaps. He paused thoughtfully. We have misunderstood the nature of its rage. Lord Cedric rose so suddenly that his chair scraped violently across the stone floor. Misunderstood. His voice echoed through the chamber. That monster slaughtered an entire regiment. It nearly destroyed the Western prison. It has terrified this kingdom for years. He leaned across the table. You would have us pity it? Alaric met his furious gaze without raising his own voice. I would have us understand it. Understanding, however, had never been popular among frightened men. The Chancellor stood slowly. We cannot take chances. He unfolded a royal decree sealed with crimson wax. The execution will proceed. Silence followed. Even Alaric lowered his eyes. The next blood moon is 3 nights away. The High Priest has completed the purification ritual. The silver execution spears are ready. This time, his voice hardened. The beast dies. Far away from the council chamber, Elena knew nothing of their decision. She spent the afternoon gathering fresh comfrey beside the monastery stream while sunlight filtered gently through the trees. Dragonflies skimmed across the water. Wildflowers bent beneath the summer breeze. The world beyond Blackthorn Castle still remembered beauty. She filled her basket with herbs before returning to the monastery kitchen. Mother Agnes looked up from kneading bread. You've been smiling lately. Elena blinked. Have I? The elderly abbess chuckled softly. You hum while you work. I always hum. No. Mother Agnes smiled knowingly. Lately. She dusted flour from her hands. You listen between the songs. Elena lowered her eyes. She wasn't certain how to explain it. Every evening she descended into the dungeon expecting fear. Instead, she found herself wondering whether the wolf had eaten, whether the silver burns hurt less, whether he had slept after she left. She had begun bringing different herbs each night, carefully choosing those that soothed pain rather than merely treating wounds. She told herself it was because every living creature deserved compassion. She tried not to ask why she remembered the exact shade of his blue eyes. As dusk settled across the valley, she prepared another basket. Fresh bread, warm broth, clean bandages, a small pouch filled with dried lavender. When she reached the castle chapel, Captain Rowan stood waiting. His expression looked different tonight. More troubled. You should go back. Elena frowned slightly. Why? The captain hesitated. I cannot tell you. His weathered hands tightened around his spear. But things are changing. I only came to bring food. I know. He glanced toward the sealed stairway. So did you yesterday. And the day before. Another long silence passed. Finally he sighed. I've guarded that door for 8 years. I've watched men twice my size flee after hearing one roar. He looked directly into Elena's eyes. But when you come, his voice became almost uncertain. It waits. The words lingered between them. Elena felt something warm and strangely fragile stir inside her chest. She had noticed it too. The wolf no longer hid in the darkness. He no longer growled the moment she arrived. Sometimes, she suspected. He recognized her footsteps before she reached the final corridor. Captain Rowan quietly unlocked the heavy gate. If you hear anything unusual tonight. He stopped. Run. Elena nodded gently. I promise. She lifted the lantern once more and disappeared into the descending staircase. Long after the light vanished below, Rowan remained standing before the open doorway. One of the younger guards approached him. Captain, do you really think that girl can tame the beast? Rowan stared into the darkness. After several moments, he answered. No. His weathered face softened almost imperceptibly. I think. He looked toward the empty stairwell. She reminds it that it was never born one. Deep beneath the castle, Hidden beyond enchanted gates and silver chains, the great wolf suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the distant staircase. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then came the faintest sound. Soft footsteps. Steady. Unhurried. The familiar rhythm echoed through the endless stone corridors. His brilliant blue eyes, dull with exhaustion only moments before, slowly brightened. Without a growl. Without hesitation. He rose to his feet and walked toward the iron door long before Elena's lantern came into view. For the first time since darkness had claimed his world, he was waiting not for freedom, but for someone. Storm clouds gathered long before sunset. By evening, the sky above Blackthorn Castle had disappeared beneath layers of rolling black clouds that swallowed every trace of moonlight. Wind rushed through the mountain pass, bending ancient pine trees until their branches scraped against the castle walls like skeletal fingers. The blood moon was only 2 nights away. Everyone felt it. The horses refused their feed. The ravens abandoned the towers. Even the monastery bells sounded strangely hollow as they echoed across the valley. Inside the castle, preparations had already begun. Blacksmiths worked through the night forging fresh silver spearheads. Priests carried sacred oil through every corridor, tracing ancient symbols upon doors and stone pillars. Additional guards surrounded the western chapel. No one explained why. No one needed to. Fear was explanation enough. Elena noticed the difference the moment she arrived. Captain Rowan no longer stood alone. 6 armed knights waited beside him, their polished armor reflecting the trembling torchlight. Heavy silver-tipped spears rested against their shoulders, and each man watched the stairway leading underground with quiet tension. She slowed her steps. What happened? Rowan hesitated before answering. The blood moon draws near. I know. The curse always grows stronger before it rises. He avoided her eyes. So do men's fears. Elena looked toward the closed chapel doors. Something inside her chest tightened. Will they hurt him? The captain remained silent. Silence answered more honestly than words ever could. He unlocked the heavy gate. You should not stay long tonight. She nodded gently. I'll only make sure he's eaten. The lantern in her hand cast long golden shadows as she descended the endless staircase once again. The air felt different. Thicker. Heavier. The silver runes carved into the walls glowed brighter than before, their pale light pulsing slowly beneath the stone like veins carrying liquid moonlight. As Elena reached the final corridor, she stopped. She had not yet lifted her lantern around the last corner. Yet she already knew. He was there. Waiting. When the warm circle of light finally reached the great iron door, she found the enormous wolf sitting only inches behind the bars. Not pacing. Not growling. Simply waiting exactly where she always appeared. His blue eyes met hers instantly. For the first time since they had met. She thought she saw recognition. A strange warmth spread quietly through her heart. Good evening. The words escaped naturally. As though greeting an old friend. The wolf blinked once. His ears lifted. Elena knelt beside the hatch. I brought fresh broth tonight. She smiled faintly while arranging the bowls. And more lavender. The familiar scent drifted through the narrow opening. The wolf lowered his head, inhaling deeply. Then suddenly, he stiffened. Every muscle beneath his scarred body tightened. His ears flattened violently. A deep growl rumbled through his chest. Not at Elena. Beyond her. She frowned. What is it? The answer came only seconds later. Footsteps. Not hers. Several pairs. Measured. Armored. Echoing from somewhere high within the staircase. The wolf rose immediately. The calm that had surrounded him for days vanished in an instant. His breathing quickened. His pupils narrowed. Silver collars around his neck flickered with pale light. Elena slowly turned toward the corridor. 3 figures emerged from the darkness. Captain Rowan, Court Mage Alaric, and Lord Cedric Hawthorne. The noble's expression twisted with open disgust the moment his eyes landed upon the wolf. So, he sneered. This is the miracle. Elena stood. My lord. Cedric ignored her completely. He stepped closer to the iron bars, studying the beast with cold satisfaction. It still remembers how to kneel. The wolf answered with a thunderous growl that shook dust from the ceiling. Every torch flickered. Rowan instinctively lowered his spear. Alaric remained perfectly still. Only his sharp eyes watched the creature. Then Elena. Then the creature again. As though comparing two impossible pieces of a forgotten puzzle. Cedric laughed. Look at it. It pretends to be tame. He reached for the silver dagger hanging at his belt. Elena's heartbeat skipped. My lord. Without warning, Cedric drove the blade through the narrow gap between the bars. The silver tip slashed across the wolf's wounded shoulder. A cry exploded through the dungeon. Not a roar. A cry of pain. Fresh blood darkened the silver-black fur almost instantly. No. Elena rushed forward instinctively. She threw herself between the bars and Cedric's outstretched arm, shielding the wounded creature despite the thick iron separating them. What are you doing? Cedric stared at her as though she had lost her mind. Move aside. He's already injured. He is a monster. He's suffering. He deserves to suffer. The words echoed through the chamber like another wound. Behind Elena, the wolf trembled violently. His breathing became ragged. The glowing runes surrounding the dungeon flared brighter than they ever had before. Silver collars burned against his neck. Pain rippled through every muscle. Yet, he did not lunge. He did not attack. Instead, he slowly lowered his head behind Elena's back. Almost as though, even in agony, he refused to risk hurting the only person who had ever stood between him and a weapon. Alaric saw it. His eyes widened ever so slightly. That single movement shattered everything he believed he understood about the beast beneath Blackthorn Castle. Because monsters driven only by bloodlust did not restrain themselves. They did not choose mercy. They certainly did not hide behind the protection of a fragile Omega. Elena knelt immediately beside the hatch, ignoring Cedric completely. You've opened the wound, she whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. Please. Her trembling fingers reached toward the clean bandages inside her basket. I'll fix it. Behind her, the wolf remained utterly still. Not because the chains forced him, but because her voice had asked him to. Blood has a language that even silence cannot hide. The first crimson drop struck the stone floor with a sound so soft that only Elena noticed it. It slid slowly from the wolf's wounded shoulder, weaving between cracks in the ancient rock before disappearing beneath the iron bars. She stared at it for only a heartbeat. Then she moved. Ignoring Lord Cedric's furious glare, Elena untied the small bundle of fresh bandages from her basket with trembling fingers. The familiar scent of lavender and honey rose into the cold dungeon air, briefly overpowering the sharp metallic smell of silver and blood. You've hurt him enough. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yet the words seemed to echo through the chamber. Cedric's expression darkened. You presume to lecture a noble? I am asking you to stop. He is a beast. He is bleeding. Those 4 words hung between them like an accusation no one could answer. Captain Rowan lowered his eyes. Even the hardened soldiers behind him shifted uneasily. The wound across the wolf's shoulder had opened wider than Elena first realized. Silver burns surrounded the cut in ugly black lines, as though the enchanted blade had carried poison within its edge. The great wolf remained motionless. His breathing was uneven. His muscles trembled beneath his scarred coat. Yet he made no attempt to strike. No attempt to escape. His luminous blue eyes stayed fixed on Elena alone. Slowly, carefully, she reached one hand through the narrow hatch. Captain Rowan instinctively stepped forward. Miss Elena. His warning came too late. Her fingertips crossed the threshold. Every story ever told about the beast of Blackthorn Castle insisted that no living person survived touching it. The dungeon seemed to hold its breath. Elena's hand shook. Not because she doubted him. Because she was human. Because fear still lived inside her. She simply refused to let fear make her cruel. Very gently, her fingers brushed the thick fur surrounding the wound. Warm. Much warmer than she expected. The wolf flinched. Not away. Only from pain. Elena froze immediately. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. I know. She swallowed hard. I know it hurts. The enormous creature slowly lowered his head. His eyes closed. Not in surrender. In trust. A silence deeper than any prayer settled over the dungeon. Captain Rowan stared without blinking. One soldier quietly loosened his grip on his spear. Lord Cedric looked almost offended by what he was witnessing. Only Court Mage Alaric continued watching with complete concentration. His pale gray eyes missed nothing. The beast had allowed contact. Not because chains restrained him. Because he had chosen to. That single truth overturned decades of reports, testimonies, and fear. Elena carefully spread the herbal ointment across the silver burn. The wolf's muscles tightened beneath her trembling fingers. She could feel every controlled breath. Every effort he made not to move. You don't have to be brave, she whispered softly. You only have to hold on. No one else heard those words clearly. The wolf did. One enormous ear twitched toward her voice. She wrapped the clean linen around his shoulder as best she could through the narrow opening. The task was awkward, and several times the cloth slipped from her fingers. Without warning, the wolf shifted slightly. Not away. Closer. Just enough for the bandage to reach. Elena smiled through tears. Thank you. Behind her, Lord Cedric let out a bitter laugh. Look at this madness. He turned toward Alaric. The girl imagines the monster understands gratitude. Alaric answered without looking away from the scene before him. I believe. His voice remained calm. That gratitude is exactly what we are seeing. Cedric scoffed. You've lost your senses. No. Alaric's gaze settled briefly upon the wolf. I believe we lost them years ago. Another silence followed. Only the wind outside howled through distant cracks in the castle walls. Then something changed. The silver collars surrounding the wolf's neck began glowing brighter than ever before. Ancient runes carved into the dungeon walls awakened one after another, flooding the chamber with pale blue light. The air vibrated. A deep humming sound echoed beneath the stone floor. Elena looked up. What is happening? Alaric's expression changed instantly. His calm disappeared. Everyone back. Captain Rowan frowned. My lord. Back. The old mage's voice thundered through the corridor. The blood moon is awakening the curse. The wolf suddenly inhaled sharply. Every muscle in his massive body locked. His claws scraped violently across the stone. The glowing collars tightened around his throat as though invisible hands were crushing them inward. A cry tore from his chest. Not savage. Not furious. Agonized. The sound echoed through every tunnel beneath Blackthorn Castle. Dust rained from the ceiling. Several torches went out at once. The dungeon shook. One of the silver chains anchoring the creature to the wall snapped with a deafening crack. Captain Rowan immediately drew his sword. The soldiers raised their spears. Lord Cedric stepped backward. Only Elena refused to move. The wolf's brilliant blue eyes suddenly flew open. For one terrifying heartbeat, something ancient flickered behind them. Pain. Memory. Recognition. His gaze found Elena through the storm of glowing magic. He looked at her exactly as he had every night. Not as prey. Not as an enemy. As though her face was the last thing tethering him to himself. Then, very slowly, despite unimaginable agony, the great wolf lowered his head until it rested gently against the edge of the iron hatch. His forehead leaned against the cold metal only inches from Elena's outstretched hand. She did not hesitate. Her fingers settled softly upon the thick silver-black fur between his ears. It's all right, she whispered, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. I'm here. The words were scarcely louder than breathing. Yet the impossible happened. The violent trembling eased. The furious glow of the runes softened. Even the snapping chains fell silent. Every person standing inside the dungeon watched in stunned disbelief as the beast of Blackthorn Castle calmed beneath the touch of one small omega. And somewhere deep beneath the curse that imprisoned him, a forgotten part of Lucian Ashcroft remembered what it felt like to come home. There are moments when destiny does not arrive with thunder. It arrives with a whisper that only two hearts can hear. Elena kept her hand resting gently upon the wolf's head long after the violent shaking had faded. The thick silver-black fur beneath her fingertips remained warm despite the freezing air that filled the dungeon. She could still feel the powerful heartbeat beneath his skull, steady now, no longer racing against invisible torment. The enormous creature exhaled slowly. Not the ragged breath of pain. Not the furious growl of a predator. A quiet sigh. The kind someone releases after carrying a burden for far too long. No one in the chamber dared move. Captain Rowan lowered his sword first. The polished blade touched the stone with a soft metallic click. One by one, the soldiers followed. Even they could no longer pretend they were witnessing a monster preparing to kill. They were watching someone endure suffering with impossible restraint. Court Mage Alaric stepped closer to the glowing runes surrounding the prison wall. His fingers hovered just above the ancient silver inscriptions. The symbols had changed. Only slightly, but unmistakably. Several runes that had burned crimson for years now glowed with a pale blue light. Not because the enchantment had weakened. Because it had responded. He frowned. Impossible. Lord Cedric folded his arms. What now? Alaric did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed upon the shifting runes. These seals were created to suppress uncontrolled violence. Cedric scoffed. Exactly. The mage slowly turned toward him. They're strongest when the curse is strongest. So. His voice grew quieter. They should never calm themselves. Silence settled once again. The old mage looked toward Elena. But they did. Cedric's expression hardened. You believe the girl caused this? I believe. Alaric searched carefully for words worthy of what stood before him. The curse is reacting to her. No one knew what that truly meant. Least of all Elena. She had never considered herself extraordinary. She possessed no royal blood. No powerful magic. No ancient prophecy. She was simply a young Omega who had never learned to look away from another creature's pain. The wolf slowly lifted his head beneath her hand. His blue eyes met hers once more. Tonight they looked different. Clearer. Less clouded by endless agony. He studied her face with remarkable stillness. Almost. As though trying to remember something. A faint breeze drifted through the corridor. Elena's chestnut hair slipped loose across her cheek. Without thinking, the great wolf leaned forward. His enormous muzzle brushed gently against the edge of her sleeve. The touch lasted only a heartbeat. Light. Careful. Almost hesitant. Like someone asking permission they feared would never be granted. Elena smiled before she realized she was smiling. You're saying thank you, she whispered. The wolf blinked slowly. Captain Rowan released a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. I've never seen anything like this. Neither had Alaric. Yet the old mage's thoughts had already traveled far beyond the dungeon. He remembered forgotten records locked beneath the royal archives. Ancient journals written before the kingdom itself existed. Legends dismissed as fairy tales. Stories claiming that some curses could never be broken by swords. Only by someone untouched by hatred. He had laughed at those tales as a young scholar. Tonight, he no longer found them amusing. Far above the dungeon, thunder rolled across the mountains. Rain struck the castle windows with renewed force. The blood moon was drawing closer. Time was running out. Lord Cedric finally broke the silence. This changes nothing. He glared coldly at the wolf. The execution proceeds. Elena looked up sharply. Execution. Cedric answered without hesitation. 2 nights from now. Her face turned pale. No. The order has already been signed. He hasn't harmed anyone. He is harmed enough. Elena rose slowly to her feet. He was attacked. He did not fight back. He is chained. He could have killed us. But he didn't. Every word echoed through the chamber. Cedric's patience vanished. You've known that creature for less than a week. I've known monsters my entire life. His voice became ice. And that thing is one of them. Elena looked back toward the wolf. He had not moved. Not once. Even after hearing the word execution. His eyes remained fixed quietly upon her. There was no pleading inside them. No anger. only a strange sadness that reached far deeper than fear. As though some forgotten part of him had expected this ending all along. Something inside Elena broke. She stepped closer to the bars once more. "I'll come back tomorrow." Her voice trembled. And the next day, she swallowed the lump rising painfully in her throat. "I won't leave you alone." The wolf remained perfectly still. Then, very slowly, he lowered his head once again. Not from weakness. Not from submission. It felt almost like acceptance. Or perhaps, a silent promise returned. Captain Rowan quietly unlocked the corridor gate leading back toward the staircase. "We should go." Elena nodded reluctantly. She gathered her empty bowls into the basket, though her eyes never truly left the wolf. When she reached the first bend in the corridor, she paused. Something made her turn back one last time. The lantern's fading light barely reached the prison door now. Yet she could still see him. The great wolf had not returned to the darkness. He remained exactly where she had left him, watching, waiting, as though the sound of her footsteps had become the only measure of time left in his endless night. Elena pressed one hand against the little wooden music box hidden beneath her cloak. "I'll save you," she whispered so softly that even the wind nearly stole the words away. She believed no one had heard them. She was wrong. Inside the silent prison, the wolf slowly closed his eyes. And somewhere beneath layers of ancient magic, unbearable pain, and a curse older than kingdoms, the forgotten king remembered the warmth of hope for the very first time in years.